The story of Faoric Red Crow is written in ash. In his childhood during the 5th century of the Second Era, the capital region of the Reach, the homeland of the Reachman tribes distantly related to the Bretons of High Rock, had already fallen under the control of the Nords of Skyrim. The capital of Markarth itself is held by a Nord king, who pays tribute to Western Skyrim in exchange for protection and recognition of their sovereignty. This king is none other than Faoric's father, King Lodvar, who styles his house as Reachbreaker, proudly touting their subjugation of the Reach for all to hear. Despite their connection by blood, in his heart Faoric had already disavowed his father long ago. You see, Faoric was not counted among the true-born children of King Lodvar and Queen Grelid. Indeed, his darker coloring betrays that the blood of the Reach runs strong in his veins. His mother was a Reachwoman commoner in the king's service named Essiana, who the king had decided to take as his mistress, but it's unlikely she felt much affection for the king. After all, the king of the Reach was a wrathful and sadistic weakling, wretched, unloved, and feared by his subjects for his cruelty, while Faoric had always remembered his mother as a gentle and quiet soul, who believed naively that forgiveness pleased the gods despite what other Reachmen might have had to say. It's easy to imagine that she'd gone along with the king's whims, if only to avoid his wrath. But despite all this, she still considered Faoric, her son born of this illicit relationship, to be the one blessing she received in her humble life. She doted on him, teaching him the ways of his Reachman ancestors as he grew, giving him a sense of love and belonging in a court of Nords that would always reject him as a half-breed and a bastard. Essiana had always told her son that through her, he was descended from the legendary Briarheart Faolan the Red Eagle, who defended the Reach against the conquest of the First Empire, and was the one from whom was taken his name, Faoric, which meant Red Crow to match the Red Eagle, Faolan, of old. Putting aside how true the claim might have been, it gave the young Faoric something to be proud of, something that made him feel special, rather than inferior to his full Nord siblings. But thankfully Faoric was not completely alone and without childhood friends. His half-sister Princess Kirsten, older than him by 10 years, known for being fair and quick to befriend, treated him no less than their true-born siblings, showing kindness to him despite the objections of their elder brother Prince Balder, the heir to the Reach, who had unfortunately inherited some of the worst parts of their father's personality. But Kirsten had always been there to stand up for her youngest brother, and Faoric, one who forgot not a single slight nor kindness done unto him, cherished her alone amongst his half-siblings. As he grew up, he began to receive more formal education. He was still a child of the king despite being a bastard after all, and expected to one day serve him as a loyal retainer. But it didn't take long for Faoric to realize that his mother was being mistreated by the king. One night, he couldn't bear to watch what was happening any longer, and came out of hiding to defend his mother. But he was hit by King Lodvar hard, and told to remember his place as a bastard Reachblood. The next morning, though his mother tried to hide it, he knew the king had heard her for his protests. She left for her duties as though all were normal, but Faoric only blamed himself for what happened. Even as he would extend his hand to protect his mother, he only ended up hurting her even more. But what kind of man was he if he stood idly by while his mother was being mistreated so? More than any high position of lordship he was promised, this became his mission. A dream that one day when he was older, he would steal his mother away from the clutches of the king, to escape together and make a new life for themselves in the wilds of the Reach, away from all the machinations of kings and jarls and chieftains that constantly hounded them all their lives. After all, why not? The lands of the Reach were vast. They could surely find a safe haven far from the king and his soldiers, and through the land they were provided everything they needed to survive. He felt as though there was a great destiny in front of him. Indeed, his ancestor Faolan Red Eagle must have been guiding him on this path. What was needed on his part was just hard work and determination. And so, scraping together what little hope life had yet to beat away from his heart, he went far beyond the martial lessons the court expected of him, training with the sword every day until his hands bled, secretly studying voraciously the great battles fought by Faolan Red Eagle for whom he was named, dreaming of that day when he would grow up and finally save his mother from the clutches of the evil king. But that day would never come. When they showed him the body, they explained that she was found alone in the forest, and that clearly a wild Reachman must have violently attacked her. And in that moment it took all Faoric had not to lash out and cut down the fool who had dared to tell him such a brazen lie, and had even tried to foist the blame onto his people, for he knew the truth. He'd spied that his mother had been called yet again into the king's chambers just last night, and now, the next morning, her body was here. This foul murder could only have been by the king's hand, but he kept his feelings bottled inside, for there were enemies all around him, and one wrong move that gave away his rage could easily mean losing his head. Faoric, now 15 years old, felt as though the gods had heard his thoughts, his plan to take his mother and escape from Markarth when he had fully grown, and by taking her away from him right at the precipice mocked him, as if to call him a naive child and a coward for his hesitation, a craven, just like his father. That night, Faoric cried himself to sleep in vengeful tears, and with his dream broken, dreamt of something new. A future where the Reach stood united behind a warrior fearsome and powerful, and together unleashed a great fire to burn away the invaders from Skyrim, so they may never threaten their peace again. The figure he saw in his dreams must certainly have been the Red Eagle, calling him, no doubt, to enact justice by destroying King Lodvar, the House of Reachbreaker, and all who had sought to profit from their people's subjugation. Never again would he let himself hesitate. Never again would he watch all that he loved to be taken away from him. From that day onward, Faoric was changed forever. The priestly forgiveness his mother had tried to instill into him as a child he struck away from his heart, and thereupon replaced it with an insatiable thirst to rise to the greatness of his namesake, and exact vengeance against his own blood family, the Reachbreakers, the tyrant invaders of the Reach. 5 years after losing his mother, Faoric has already become a respected young general in the Kingdom of the Reach, excelling in his charge of defending a strategically important mountain pass, an area that was constantly threatened by the incursions of the Western Reachmen, who took more to the ways of the elven Durrani ancestors than their cousins in Markarth. King Lodvar had been cautious after, well, what he considered to be his mishap with Faoric's mother. He'd been spying on Faoric to see if he knew the truth about his mother's death and was conspiring treason, but his plan to turn him against his own people by blaming the Reachman appeared to be working. He had, until now, served him loyally without question, and had valiantly defended his kingdom against the Western Reachmen on multiple occasions, all of which had relieved his fears. Tonight, in celebration of a recent military victory, Faoric had invited the court to a feast, and King Lodvar graciously accepted. There, the court made merry, toasting to the brilliance of Lord Faoric in his victory. King Lodvar jested drunkenly that perhaps for all his looks, Faoric had the heart of a Nord warrior after all. But although the drink had begun to take hold of the king and his court, Faoric remained completely present. He invited his sister Kirsten outside on the pretense of a private chat away from the other guests. They hadn't seen each other for a while, with Faoric being busy defending the realm and all, and after some catching up, Kirsten congratulated Faoric on his recent victory, fully genuine in her pride for her younger brother. Seeing as they were alone, she spilled a secret. She wished that Prince Balder, the heir to the throne, was a little bit more like Faoric. She thought that Faoric would make a genuinely good heir for the Reach, and even perhaps she dared to say, a better heir than either of their brothers. That perhaps if he was king, peace could finally be achieved in a Reach ruled by someone who was at once both Nord and Reachman. But she had no idea that the boy she remembered from her childhood no longer stood before her. Faoric told his sister that perhaps in another life where he still had his mother, and King Lodvar had designated her as his heir, he would need not have even been king. Indeed, he would have gladly stepped back as was appropriate for a baseborn son, and honored and supported her as queen, to work towards this peace and unity that she sought between his people and hers. But in this life that had made no space for such fantasies, so long as the gods continue to be just, he said, peace between the Nords and the Reach shall never come to pass. And with the blow of a horn he had kept hidden in his cloak, the Reachmen laying in wait in the trees came forth, and as Faoric commanded, barred the doors of the feasting halls and leisure quarters, and set them alight. Although the king's honor guard tried to stop them, the Reachmen were too numerous and they were overwhelmed. Kirsten broke down, inconsolable, as she realized in horror that her entire family was doomed to burn, and heard the screams and desperate pounding that came from the halls. Faoric, however, only stared into the flames, relishing his revenge on the king, his brothers, and the duplicitous court of sycophants who had tried to cover up his mother's foul murder for the promise of gold. Kirsten could not forgive her brother this monstrous act, swearing tearfully that one day she would return to avenge her family and bring peace to the Reach on her own terms. Faoric still remembered the girl who had stood up for him in his youth, and so he only told her that she should leave the Reach and never return to Markarth to press her claim to the throne, or else he would be forced to recant the mercy he was now showing her and have her promptly executed, and thus concluded their bitter separation. The cries echoing from inside the halls had now faded away, and the Reachmen cheered for their homeland newly reclaimed. The story of Faoric Red Crow is written in ash. It has now been 8 years since the House of Reachbreaker was burned, and the Reach finally returned to the Reachmen. Faoric Red Crow is 27 years old, with an 8-year-old son, Morven, whose mother is not recorded in the annals of history, but likely passed away in childbirth. After brutally disposing of King Lodvar and his own half-brothers, Faoric has inherited most of his father's domain centered in Markarth, but the path to his revenge against the Nords has not been quite so straightforward. He thought that the problems of his mixed birth would disappear after driving away the Nords, yet even the tribes he considered to be his own people distrusted him. Despite what he did for the good of the Reach, the truth was that he was a traitor and a kinslayer. Not to mention, many found his claims of being descended from Faolan Red Eagle to be laughable, finding it ridiculous that a simple serving maid would claim descent from such a legend, although few dared to say so within Faoric's earshot. 3 major tribes, old and proud, dominated the lands of the Reach. Directly bordering Faoric's domain to the north was the Sarkarain clan, worshippers of the land who held their Druidoc mountains sacred, led by Chieftain Aldrich. To the southeast was Clan Malik, led by Chieftain Ulrich, known for his spiritualism and brutality alike. His clan was descended from a powerful hagraven, and claimed to be the keepers of Faolan Red Eagle's remains. It's no surprise that they are among the biggest skeptics of Faoric's claims about his bloodline. Clan Malik also had familial ties to their neighbors, the Matic clan, led by Chiefess Madka, a chiefess renowned as a steadfast diplomatic leader. The clan motto was "Our hatred burns bright," and prior to the fall of the Reachbreakers, they held some of the staunchest resistance against Nord occupation amongst the tribes, but for now none of them recognized his rule. Taking a closer look at Faoric's situation, most of the minor Reachman lords in his father's domain willingly served Faoric as their new chieftain, but one man, Chieftain Anlin of Karth Waston, had always strongly opposed his rise to power. This Chieftain Anlin, in the time of the Reachbreakers, had always been in favor of accepting their Nord overlords, loyally swearing fealty to King Lodvar and marrying a Nord noblewoman, Elle of House Bulgar, who happens to be the sister-in-law of Faoric's half-sister, Princess Kirsten, who, as an aside, was now gathering men in Eastern Skyrim to help press her claim to Markarth. But returning the talk of Anlin and Elle, however much this Nord woman claimed to have adopted the ways of the Reachman, Faoric had little regard for someone so well connected in the aristocratic sphere of the Nords, claiming to have suddenly become a Reachwoman, and moreover saw her husband as a spineless traitor to his own people. Though skirmishes in years past had seen Faoric gain the advantage and take Anlin's hold of Blindcliff for himself, he still needed to deal the finishing blow. So renewing his vows to Malakath, Lord of Ash and Bone, he declared one last war to defeat this first enemy, a mere stepping stone to his conquest of Skyrim. His forces not only outnumbered Anlin's, but in the pitched battle itself, Anlin's unshielded spearmen and light infantry were helplessly cut down at range by the archers and mages of Faoric's band. Indeed, this Chief Anlin, who had always wished for peace and forgiveness of their conquerors, was incompetent as a war leader. And not just his people, but his loved ones too would pay dearly for it. When Faoric's army breached the settlement and stormed its halls, they found Chiefess Elle hiding in her chambers, and brought her before the Red Crow to await his judgment. She begged for mercy, claiming that she only wanted peace and harmony in the Reach just like Faoric's sister, and that she'd faithfully accepted the guidance of the old gods all this time she had been married to Chieftain Anlin. But the Red Crow, ever watchful, knew all about this Chiefess Elle from his time growing up in the Reachbreaker court. Once, he had been part of a gathering of the Reachman lords serving King Lodvar, participating in a ritual where it was customary to drink the raw blood of a deer in worship of the Hunt Father Hircine. All the chieftains and chieftesses, and Faoric too, the future chieftain himself, participated in this part of the ritual, all except Chiefess Elle, who Anlin assured he understood that she must have found the ways of their people strange and was free to abstain. But Faoric, less understanding, took this as a slight. This man bending over backwards to apologize for his own people's traditions was unsightly, and behind Elle's veneer of tolerance and understanding, there must have been a hidden disgust for their people. And he continued to hold this grudge even now as she knelt before him. He passed down his judgment. If she truly accepted the worship of the old gods as righteous, he would give her a chance to partake fully in a ritual sacred to their faith. And so, before a gathering of his warriors, upon a shrine prepared in the traditional way, he had Chiefess Elle sacrificed to the gods. They would be able to judge her devotion to them directly. And so, Faoric sealed his conquest of his father's old territories, sending the last of the Reachbreaker lackeys scattering. Chieftain Anlin, who was nowhere to be found to protect his wife, swore revenge against Faoric through a missive, but he only laughed. What threat could a man who fights for nobody in the Reach possibly pose to him? Now, with his immediate enemy crushed, Faoric instead looked to create new allies. Within the territory rightfully belonging to Markarth was an area called Brasswater. Brasswater was an area filled with Dwemer ruins, and the chiefess had a reputation for being quite obsessed with the Dwemer, apparently even choosing to worship spirits that were in the image of those lost ancient people. Faoric didn't quite understand her obsessive fixation on the Dwemer, but certainly if there was anything useful in those ruins, he wanted in on whatever it was. Chiefess Moira had lost her parents in a war against the Maligs, and so Faoric promised her that he would protect her rights to studying her Dwemer ruins so long as she swore loyalty to him and agreed to share some of her research. A deal that, considering she was more a scholar than a warrior, she accepted. To commemorate their vassalage, Faoric invited the chiefess on a hunt, during which he was severely injured by a boar. Certainly unfortunate timing, because it was also about time for Faoric to remarry, and he'd scheduled to meet with the sister of a Reachman chieftain unjustly subjugated by the Nords, Kinola Brennig. Luckily for him, however, she didn't seem to mind, and being someone who herself was a type for hunts and warfare, was actually impressed by Faoric's story of how he subdued his quarry and gained his scars. She also didn't seem to have many qualms about the means Faoric used to overthrow the Reachbreakers, as someone who herself harbored deep resentment against their Nord overlords and dreamed of their clan being free once again. Faoric respected her strong ideals, and when they jousted with words on a discussion on battlefield strategy, Faoric felt that she was more than a match for him in tactics, feeling that she could be a valuable confidant on matters of warfare. She had already been serving as her brother's marshal after all. Both parties were happy with the match, and they were married soon after. Shortly following their happy union, news came that Chiefess Madka, head of the Matic clan, had called for a confederation of Reachman tribes, a union of tribes swearing to stand in joint defense of one another against all that would threaten their people. Faoric had honestly hoped for all the clans to swear fealty directly to him, but his loyalty was to his people, and if this was their will, then so be it. But still, in the background, he made plans to eventually convince them all to rally behind his banner as one. Yet, despite all the other clans agreeing to join the Confederation, one clan had refused, the Sarkarain clan of the Druidoc Mountains. Faoric, being his direct neighbor, went himself to convince Chieftain Aldrig to swear the earth to protect his brothers and sisters. But Chieftain Aldrig, callous and uncaring, told Faoric that the Sarkarains did not need the protection of other muling tribes when they were protected by the great sacred Druidoc Mountains. Oh, but at this, Faoric swore that he would prove him so very wrong. He declared a war to bring this belligerent chieftain to heel, and it was blazing fast, with Faoric's forces capturing Chieftain Aldrig in their very first engagement. As long as he stayed in line, he could keep his Druidoc Mountains for all he cared. Shortly after, a daughter was born to Faoric and Kinola, a girl they named Aidsel, who was strong and full of life from the very beginning. They were sure this daughter would grow up to be a fine warrior of the Reach. Later, at a feast he held celebrating the full union of the Reachmen, Faoric found something unnerving. One of his men proudly proclaimed that he found and killed an uninvited guest, and when Faoric saw their lifeless face, his blood froze as he recognized the features of someone who he once loved. The image of a ram proudly embroidered on their clothing confirmed it. The body, without a doubt, belonged to his niece by Princess Kirsten. He had her given a quick but respectable burial. Certainly a strange twist of fate that this might be, in a sense, the last way he would ever meet his sister again. But he couldn't let his sentiments get in the way of his goal. He returned to the feast, and donning once again the mask of the Red Crow, toasted humbly to the chiefess who had founded the great union of their tribes. But in the meantime, Chieftain Aldrig had been plotting his revenge. He wanted to press his brother's claim to the Druidoc Mountains, which would allow them to break away from Faoric's rule. Interestingly, said brother wanted nothing to do with this war, which was a smart move because Aldrig once again stood no chance against Faoric. Their assault of Dragontooth was quickly quelled, ending in Aldrig being captured once again. Faoric would no longer tolerate his antics, and forced Aldrig to swear by the old gods, not his mountain gods, to leave the Reach and never return, for he had already forsaken his right to be one of them. The next 6 years were spent continuing to improve relations with the other Reachman tribes, and Kinola gave birth to Faoric's second son, Chiarmid. Despite being a sickly child, he was born under the sign of the headsman. The gods were sure to have a great destiny planned for him, beyond his childhood sickness. Just a month later, he received word from a Western ally, requesting help against an incursion from their Witchman cousins. These Witchmen of the Western Reach had their own ideas about how war should be fought. They preferred the heavily armored knights of mainland High Rock, but Faoric had beaten them before when he was charged with defending his mountain pass all those years ago. Their knights were too hungry for honor, attacking the Reachmen in an uphill battle in the mountains and charging across rivers that slowed them tremendously. These crushing losses forced them to surrender, and Faoric learned that their queen was an outward worshipper of Malakath, a fact which pleased him. Certainly he had proven his superiority in the eyes of the Lord of Ash and Bone by defeating her. But perhaps the most important battle was an initial skirmish defending against the Nords, who were invading the lands now ruled by one of the Sarkarain children. Crucially, their forces engaged in the forests of Deepwood. The terrain favored Faoric spellswords, mages, and archers. From positions in the trees, they fired at the Nord heavy infantry, leaving them confused and helpless against their unconventional tactics. With all these victories, and especially this victory against the Nords behind him, Faoric decided that he finally had the leverage to unite the Reachman and convince them to invade Haafingar, the capital region of Western Skyrim, who initially sanctioned the invasion of their lands. In the meeting he called with the chieftains of the Confederation, Faoric did have his staunch supporters. Chieftain Ulrich of the Malig clan, who once distrusted Faoric's bloodline claims, had now come around to him in admiration of his impressive military feats, and also thanks to their past bonding over food and drink. And he declared that upon the name of his clan Malig that tended the grave of Faolan himself, that this man, the Red Crow, was truly the Red Eagle reborn in his descendant, come again to lead the Reach to freedom. But at this, some of the more conscientious chieftains said that they were already free. They had already driven the Nords from their land, and now the Reach could stand strong forever. Why continue the bloodshed? Bloodshed that would kill innocents on the side of both Skyrim and the Reach, when they could instead have peace and harmony with their fellow neighbors. And at this, the Red Crow stepped forward, and all went silent awaiting his word, gawking at this man who claimed to be their savior come again anew. He thus spoke. If it is a reason not to pursue peace with the Nords that you seek, then allow me to give it to you. As you all know already from the acts I have carried out in her name, my heart belongs to the Reach. But my father was a Nord, and I grew up surrounded by his people. I, out of all the chieftains here, know best of the people of Skyrim and their culture. While we have never put much stock in the written word of the outsiders, allow me to recite for you the words from a tome I once read in my youth. It said that Nords consider themselves to be the children of the sky. They call Skyrim the throat of the world because it is where the sky exhaled on the land and formed them. They see themselves as eternal outsiders and invaders, and even when they conquer and rule another people, they feel no kinship with them. These words come from a tome called Children of the Sky, written by the Cyrodiils. Even they who have never been conquered by the Nords write of them so. What of us who have? What have we seen of the nature of the Nords? Have their actions against our people not supported every word that I have spoken from this tome? And so how can you hope for peace with a people who so pridefully style themselves as invaders and conquerors? We have already been conquered once by the Cyrodiils, and my ancestor Faolan the Red Eagle sacrificed his life so our homeland could remain free of their empire's yoke. We were conquered by the Nords, and as you all know, I and those loyal to me burned the so-called House of Reachbreaker to the ground. So what if we were to now declare ourselves a nation of friendly, peaceful tribes, and let all Tamriel approach us with their gifts and smiles and offers of reconciliation? Is this what you would call the love of our neighbors? Then I say you must open your ears and listen closely, for then you will hear instead the disdainful laughter at the people who let themselves be conquered twice, and then while sitting on top of the corpses left behind, simply accepted gifts and little trinkets for their trouble. If we leave things as they are, it shall be laughter that will echo to the end of all history. At this, the bravado of the conscientious philosophers began to fade, and Faoric could see the indignance crossing the faces of the warriors, who looked at them as if they were weaklings. He already had them all. He just needed to move in for the final blow. This was never a choice between being feared or loved, my people of the Reach. Here we have been given a choice between being respected or being written into the annals of history as the least of all peoples in Tamriel. Be not mistaken, I too look forward to the time of peace in which our children and their children after them will live in paradise until the end of time. But I say we let peace come after we ensure the world will never dare to invade the Reach a third time. All pledged their blades to him there, Sarkarain, Malig, and Matic alike, and the Red Crow smiled his crooked smile. There, for the purpose of striking at the Nords so they may never threaten them again, a new united Reach was born. Faoric would be crowned King of the Reach in formal ceremony, and already in response, Skyrim sent raiders across the borders as a warning, letting them know exactly what they thought of their new king. In response, he called for a new order of holy warriors dedicated to the old gods to be mobilized, who could act autonomously to defend the towns of the Reach in which they were stationed. And then before the other chieftains, he was crowned King of the Reachman. But there was one last missing piece required for him to fully assume his destiny. Chieftain Ulrich returned the sword of Faolan Red Eagle to its rightful place, so he may come again anew to lead his people, as was written. And as the Hagravens prepared him for the ritual, Faoric closed his eyes and thought back to that dream that he saw of a united Reach once again. It was so obvious looking back now, but the figure that he saw leading the free people of the Reach was not that of the Red Eagle, but of he, the Red Crow, who was his second coming. He survived the ritual that cut out his heart and replaced it anew, becoming a Briarheart warrior, the Red Eagle fully reincarnate, a spirit of vengeance, pitiless and beyond remorse. Yet even now the shadows in Faoric's past continued to haunt him. One night he received a letter bearing the sigil of the Reachbreaker ram, and discovered that it was sent by another niece of his by Princess Kirsten. In the letter, his niece, Minette, greeted her uncle and informed him first that her mother, his sister Kirsten, had already been dead for years. She admitted that her family's wealth had become meager, and that in desperation her mother and her band turned to marauding in order to provide for themselves. She apparently died after being mortally wounded in a raid, yet she had not sent this letter to beg her uncle for money. She only wished to let him know that her mother had told her as a child of the dream she shared with him years ago, and if he were to only find somewhere in his heart the desire to bring this dream to fruition, she, Minette, the last of House Reachbreaker, would work fully in cooperation with him towards this effort. But it was too late. The heart of the Red Crow had already been cut out and buried forever. He threw the letter into the campfire burning in the center of his great gathering host of Reachman and made ready. Faoric would soon fully realize that terrible dream he had all those years ago. The Reachman invasion of Haafingar began in the closing days of 2E 475. Western Skyrim was then ruled by a queen who preferred to avoid risks and conflict at all cost, but any opportunity for parley was long past. Western Skyrim could only make ready for the inevitable onslaught. The Reachmen took the initiative and gathered their forces to assault the northern mountains of Haafingar. The Nords responded by declining a direct engagement, moving their troops in their own assault of the Rorikstead area, a successful attempt at pulling the Reachmen back away from their lands. But a large contingent of their army was caught out of position and swiftly cut down before they could receive reinforcements. What remained of the Nord army retreated into the swamps of Hjalmarch to recuperate, reappearing later to liberate the settlement that was the initial staging point of the war. They once again employed evasive measures and avoided pitched battle, but eventually they were caught in Karthwasten when Faoric pinned their army against a bridge too narrow to support the retreat of thousands of men at once. Making their last stand here, the Nord warriors died in a hail of Reachman arrows and wild magics, and with no retreat behind them, their army perished there and then. And so this series of tactical blunders had effectively doomed the resistance in Haafingar, and with their standing army crushed, it was only a matter of time before the Nords would be forced to admit defeat. When the last desperate defense made by hired mercenaries was broken, the heartlands of Haafingar were now left open to the onslaught of the Red Crow. It was all just as his terrible dream had shown him. The great city of Solitude burned. Faoric fulfilled the promise that he made in his house words. Any and all of adult age who were found associated with the Nord nobility or were warriors in their service were rounded up and cruelly burned at the stake. The peasantry who didn't resist were made to watch and spread the word of the terror coming to the rest of the Nords, and soon the horrifying tale of the Red Crow was known, not only across Skyrim, but across all Tamriel. This way, from the ashes of Haafingar was born a newly expanded Reach. But such a violent and rapid expansion inevitably caused much unrest. As the Reachmen returned south to defend against an opportunistic Redguard incursion, some remnants of the Western Skyrim forces, horrified by the cruelty of the Red Crow, rose up in rebellion and came close to liberating Solitude. But the garrison held the city for just long enough for the Red Crow to flank the siege party and send them scattering. They attempted to restage the assault from a secret island base, but found the Reachmen laying in wait for them ashore. And there, Haafingar's resistance ended for good. Those who led the Nord rebellion were interrogated for information on their network, before being burned along with the rest. Yet even after this, there was still a rebellion of Reachman peasants to deal with, who accused Faoric of being a tyrant, and as they marched to Markarth to deal with this threat, Skyrim's counterattack began in 2E 483. The Nords had rallied behind the independent king of Winterhold, Grom Cruelsea, known as a determined and just warrior king. He was even married to the High Queen of Eastern Skyrim, meaning that this indeed was the vast majority of the eastern forces, gathering to make one last stand against the Red Crow. After the peasant rebellion was crushed, the opening battle of the war was fought in Karthwasten. Outnumbering them almost 2-1, the Nords took heart as their infantry broke the Reachman mages and archers. The heir to Winterhold distinguished herself, and the story of how she sent the arm of a Reachman chieftain flying was written into the sagas. But the Reachmen had a trick up their sleeve. A contingent of holy warriors had been laying in wait for the right moment to strike, and when they joined the battle, the already fatigued and beleaguered Nord warriors were sent running in defeat. The Winterhold host then hoped to engage the Reachmen at a captured fortress, but Faoric's lightly armored army moved swiftly, forcing the Nords to fight an uphill battle in the mountains. The Reachmen used the terrain to their advantage, focusing their fire on the narrow mountain paths that the Nords were forced through. The favored son of the Red Crow, Prince Diarmid, who he last saw as an infant, found himself entranced in the heat of battle, and ripped the head off a Nord warrior with his bare hands, fulfilling his destiny written in the stars and becoming known as a berserker. Demoralized by the savage display, the Nords retreated once again. They switched into a more evasive stance, avoiding engagement, and eventually the Reachmen hoped to contact the enemy once more in the same way, defending in the mountains, but it was a trap. The Nords beat them to the mountains, and the Reachmen now found the tables turned on them. And here, the Red Crow suffered his first defeat against the Nords. Hardened by their victory, the Nords pushed further into the mainland of the Reach, but were not strong enough to break the Reachman defenses completely. Prince Diarmid died an ignoble death, assassinated, a plot devised by the court of Winterhold, hoping to increase morale by removing a feared enemy warrior and the heir to the throne. Faoric was beyond mourning, and only swore retribution for the death of his favored son. The mountains that had been the stage of past battles became the proving grounds of the two armies, trading wins and losses alike with one another. But the key battle came when the Red Crow's armies used the cover of mountains to obscure their movements and surprise the Nord forces, their victory creating momentum to push the enemy back in further victories, liberating the occupied settlements and forcing the Nords to give up their assault and finally surrender. This was meant to be the last stand the Nords had poured all their resources into, and despite the odds being in the favor of their fearsome leader, it had failed miserably. With the economy of Winterhold left destitute after they invested everything into a fruitless war, the Nords were struck with fear. The voices of doomsayers filled the streets, claiming the Red Crow was the harbinger of the end times, but the voices of the Reachmen were instead raised with fervor, all now fully convinced that the Red Crow was indeed the second coming of Red Eagle. Soon they would begin their campaign to fully burn away the rest of Skyrim. Or perhaps not. In 2E 494, the Red Crow was found dead in his chambers, a dagger distinctly curved found buried in his briar heart. Indeed, the legend of Red Eagle ended with Faolan's death on the battlefield defending his people, but the ending to the vengeance of Red Crow was in the same vein as its beginning, an honorless demise brought about by treachery and deceit. Though the streets of Skyrim filled with cheers of relief, the story of the Reach was not yet done. A troubled queen was set to succeed the Red Crow, and there was much still left for the Reach to achieve, but all that is a tale for another time. The story of Faoric Red Crow is written in ash.